I always thought betrayal would sound like a screaming match or the shattering of glass, but mine arrived with a silent vibration on the nightstand at 11:47 p.m. My husband was snoring beside me, oblivious, while a single text message from my best friend lit up the dark room and torched 35 years of my life to the ground. That night, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, mentally packing for the trip we were supposed to take the next day to celebrate our 35th anniversary. Richard was sleeping next to me, breathing with that heavy rhythm that I always mistook for the sound of a man at peace. But that night, the peace was a lie. Something made me look at his phone. It was just one message, one sentence, a dagger straight to the gut. Let me know when she leaves. The sender was Brenda, my best friend for 20 years, my son's godmother, the woman I had shared secrets, tears, and endless cups of coffee with. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I read it again. Once. Twice. 3 times. But the message stayed right there, like a judge's sentence. My body went ice cold. My heart didn't just beat, it hammered against my ribs. I felt a scorching heat rise up my chest, as if my very soul was burning from the inside out. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just placed the phone back exactly where it was and looked at this sleeping man, the person I thought I had known for more than half my life. That was when I realized that true hell isn't made of fire. It's made of silence. I spent the rest of the night awake, staring at the open suitcase on the chair. It was ironic. I had planned this trip to reconnect. I thought that, far away from the noise and the daily grind, we could find each other again. But he was already planning a different kind of meeting. Brenda had always been charming, subtle, elegant, with that smile that made everyone feel comfortable around her. I admired her. I defended her when people gossiped, and while I was singing her praises, she was talking to him. There had been signs, of course, small gestures, looks, silences that now made perfect sense. But when you love someone, you choose not to see. And I chose blindness for years. That night, while he slept, I decided I wouldn't confront him. I wasn't going to cry or demand explanations. I wouldn't humiliate myself by begging for a truth I already knew. If they thought they could play me, they were about to find out they had severely underestimated me. The next morning, I got up before him. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and acted as if absolutely nothing had happened. When he came downstairs with his rehearsed smile, he hugged me from behind and said, "Ready for our trip, honey?" "Ready," I replied, without looking at him. While he rattled on about the itinerary, the reservations, and the weather forecast, I watched him, not with love, but with the cold attention of someone studying an enemy. Every word out of his mouth was another piece of the puzzle. Every smile was another lie I was learning to recognize. And as I listened to him, the first step of my plan was already forming in my mind. I didn't need to confront him yet. I needed to watch him fall, without him knowing how or when. When it was time to leave, I looked in the mirror one last time before locking the front door. I didn't see a destroyed woman. I saw a composed woman, standing on the edge of something new. I didn't know if what I felt was pain or clarity, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. On the drive to the airport, he took my hand. His fingers were trembling slightly. Maybe he sensed something. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Perfectly fine," I answered with a smile that even I didn't recognize. The flight was quiet. I pretended to read a magazine, but I was really thinking about Brenda, thinking about how they planned it all, how they must have talked about me between laughs, and how that laughter would be the last thing they had left. My mind was moving fast, organizing every piece, as if the pain had awakened a new kind of sharpness in me. I knew what I would do. Watch them. Wait for the exact moment. and then strike. When we arrived at the resort, he asked for the suite he had reserved in advance. He said it with such confidence, as if he wanted to make it clear that everything was under control. I just nodded. I smiled at the receptionist, took the key, and got into the elevator. Inside, the silence was heavy. Our reflections in the elevator mirror looked like two strangers. He was humming a song. I was mentally counting the seconds until we reached our floor. When he opened the door to the room, everything was perfectly arranged. Flowers, wine, and a note from the hotel management that read, "Welcome, special couple." I looked at him and feigned surprise. "What a nice touch, right?" I said. "You deserve it," he replied, kissing my forehead. His lie smelled like expensive cologne and old guilt. While he took a shower, I walked over to the window. The view was beautiful, the ocean, the lights of the boardwalk, the promise of a peaceful night. But behind that beauty, I felt something else, a shadow moving toward us. I realized that fate sometimes has a cruel sense of humor. This resort was the same place where we celebrated our 10th anniversary, the same place where years ago he promised me he would never hurt me. And now, 35 years later, it would be the stage where I discovered just how deep his betrayal went. But I didn't plan to do it crying, and I didn't plan to do it with rage. My revenge would be precise, silent, and clean. That night, when he came out of the bathroom, I faked a yawn. "I'm exhausted," I said. "Let's get some rest, honey. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." "Yes, it will be," I whispered. I waited for him to turn off the light. His breathing deepened. The clock struck 12:30 a.m. I took his phone and unlocked it with his thumbprint while he slept. There it was. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the hotel. She'll be out by then." And underneath, a location pin. Exactly the same resort, the same wing. The date was set. I closed it. I turned off the screen and smiled. They didn't know that the prey could also be the predator. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned every detail. I knew Brenda would arrive the next day. I knew he would go out to meet her. He was convinced I'd be out shopping or having breakfast at the resort restaurant, but I would be closer than they imagined. I prepped the small camera I always carried in my purse, checked the battery, and synced my watch. At 9:30 the next morning, I got dressed calmly. I grabbed my things and left, leaving the door just barely cracked open. There was no fear. There was no shaking. Just a certainty. The game had begun. There are silences that kill more effectively than any words screamed out loud. Mine began that morning, when I sat across from my husband at the hotel breakfast buffet and pretended everything was the same. He talked about the tourist tours, the humidity, and how overpriced the coffee was. I just looked at him. Every gesture was a rehearsed scene, every smile a coat of paint over a massive crack. I couldn't believe the man I had shared half a life with was sitting there, so calm, planning his day, while carrying another woman's message in his pocket. As I stirred my coffee, I remembered the first time I met Brenda. It was 1994. I had just moved into the neighborhood with my young kids, trying to adapt to a new, modest life. She was the first one to knock on my door. She brought a carrot cake and a huge smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood, neighbor," she told me with that disarming warmth. From that day on, she became part of my life. We shared afternoons of talking, secrets, and laughter. When Richard stayed late at work, she was the one who kept me company so I wouldn't feel lonely. When my kids got sick, she was the first to show up with medicine and encouraging words, and when I trusted her more than anyone, that was when she started digging, slowly, the hole where she would bury my trust. I remember clearly the first time I saw her look at him differently. It was at a family barbecue in the backyard. He was grilling, and we were all joking around. At one point, Brenda went over to bring him a glass of wine. Her fingers brushed his. It was barely a second, but enough for something inside me to shrink. That look, that subtle smile that you barely notice but that screams louder than any word. She looked at him the way I didn't anymore. And he, instead of looking away, held her gaze. Just 3 seconds. But they were 3 seconds that changed something forever. From then on, I started noticing details. Messages he deleted quickly, calls he took on the balcony, new excuses to go out without me. Nothing serious enough to accuse him, but strange enough to poison the calm. "You're exaggerating, Susan," Brenda would tell me when I told her my suspicions. "Men are just absent-minded, that's all." And she said it with such conviction that I ended up believing her. What irony. I was telling my fears to the woman who was causing them. Years passed, and the distance between Richard and me grew like a shadow stretching out with no one to stop it. He became colder, sharper. Sometimes he hugged me without really touching me. And when he did, I felt like he was hugging someone absent. But I was still there, holding up the unsustainable. Because women of my generation grew up with the idea that love endures all things, that marriage is forever, that you have to stay silent for the good of the family. And I stayed silent. I stayed silent for years, while the betrayal grew in the quiet until it became just another guest in my house. That morning, while we ate breakfast at the resort, I watched him with different eyes. Not with eyes of love, not even with hate. I looked at him the way you look at a stranger who lives with you out of habit. And it was in that instant that I realized it. I had been sleeping with a stranger for years. "Are you okay?" he asked me, noticing my silence. "Yeah, just a little tired." "Don't worry. After breakfast, you can rest." "Yes, I'll rest," I replied, hiding the irony in my voice. He had no idea what I was planning. He thought he still had control, but he didn't know the board had already changed. After breakfast, we went for a walk on the boardwalk. The wind was gentle and the ocean immense. We looked like a happy couple to anyone watching us pass by. Him holding my arm, me smiling naturally. But inside me, there was a hurricane. He talked, and I listened from a distance. His voice sounded hollow, like an old recording. At some point, he took my hand and said, "You know, Susan, I'm glad we made this trip." "Me too," I replied calmly. "I feel like lately we were disconnected." "Yes," I said with a faint smile. "But don't worry. Soon everything will go back to its place." If he had only known the weight of my words. In the afternoon, I went to the local market alone with the excuse of buying souvenirs. In reality, I needed to think clearly. I walked among the stalls, watching other people's lives go on as if nothing was happening. The noise, the voices, the colors, everything contrasted with the emptiness I felt inside. I took out my cell phone. I opened my email and forwarded the screenshots of the message I had read to my own account. Then I installed an automatic recording app on the phone. The idea was already clear in my mind. I wouldn't fight betrayal with words, but with evidence. That night, he had dinner with me as if nothing was wrong. He ordered wine, toasted to us, to the years together. His words sounded like cheap theater. Meanwhile, I was counting the minutes until the next day. At 10:00 p.m., Brenda sent a new message. I saw the notification reflected on his phone screen while he slept. "Everything is ready. See you at 10:15. Use the spare key. You know where it is?" It wasn't a coincidence. It was all planned, and without knowing it, he himself had given me the final clue. That night, before sleeping, I looked at him one last time with tenderness. Yes, with tenderness, because despite everything, part of me still loved him, or at least loved the man I thought he was. But that tenderness was different. It was the tenderness of a goodbye. I realized that deep down, I wasn't just looking for revenge. I was looking to recover something I had lost, my dignity. And when I turned off the bedside lamp, I knew it with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, everything would change forever. Silence would be my weapon, and the truth, my vengeance. The sunrise arrived with a strange brightness. The ocean in front of the hotel was calm, but something in the air warned me that this day wouldn't be just another day. I woke up before him. The sun was barely touching the curtains, and the room smelled like wilted flowers and someone else's perfume. I stayed watching him while he slept. His face looked peaceful, but I didn't see my husband anymore. I saw the actor who had played his role for far too long. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. I got up slowly, took a notepad from the drawer, and wrote a few lines. Today I will show you who I really am. I left it under the pillow, right where he would put his head later. Then I looked in the mirror. My face was tired, but my eyes were alive. I wasn't a broken woman. I was a woman who had decided to stop being a victim. While I got dressed, I mentally reviewed every detail of the plan. The camera was ready, the recording app was already installed on his phone, and my emails were protected with a new password. Nothing could fail. It wasn't an impulse. It was the result of a whole night thinking without tears. At 9:00, he woke up. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Perfectly," I lied with a smile. "Could we go to the pier today and then have lunch together?" "Sure, but first I want to go to the hotel spa," I said, feigning lightness. "I need to relax a little." He nodded. I gave him a quick peck and left, taking the small camera in my purse and a serenity that even I didn't understand. The spa was on the upper floor, right across from the hallway of the most expensive suites. I sat in the waiting area with a magazine, pretending to read. From there, I could discreetly observe the room we had booked. The plan was simple: pretend I was leaving and leave the door slightly ajar, just enough for him to think I had gone out. At 9:45, I went down to the room and placed the camera in a corner of the closet, with a direct view of the bed. I tested the angle, adjusted the sound, and verified the connection. Technology, for once, would be my ally. Then I opened the suitcase and took out the blue dress he always said looked too good on me for my age. I smiled. Yes, I would wear it. Not for him, but to close my own circle with dignity. At 10:00, everything was prepared. I left the room door barely cracked, grabbed my purse, and pretended to leave. But instead of going to the spa, I hid in the adjacent hallway, behind a column, from where I could see without being seen. My heart was pounding hard, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. At 10:07, I heard footsteps. I would recognize that voice anywhere. It was my husband, talking on the phone. "Yes, Brenda. Come now. She just left." My hands went cold. Even knowing what was going to happen, hearing it was like a stab wound. I heard the click of the door opening. I held my breath. Then, a short silence, and his voice. "You look beautiful, as always." And hers, sweet and familiar. "I thought we'd never pull this off, Richard." I couldn't see them from my hiding spot, but I could imagine them. Two people who confuse desire with love, lying with freedom. Several minutes passed. I listened to laughter, whispers, the unmistakable sound of a stolen kiss. The camera was recording everything, cold and impartial. I just watched from the hallway, feeling a mix of rage and triumph. It wasn't a jealous spectacle. It was the confirmation of what I always knew. Suddenly, I heard Brenda's voice. "What if she finds out?" "She won't," he said. "She's so trusting, so blind. Poor Susan." she laughed. Not poor. Naive, he corrected. Those two words went right through me. Naive. It was funny. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my calm for stupidity, but that mistake would be their ruin. I stayed in the hallway until I heard the door close again. Brenda had left. He stayed inside a few minutes more, maybe mentally reviewing what he had just done. Then he came out in a hurry, as if he feared someone might see him. I waited a couple of minutes before entering. The air inside the room was dense, impregnated with cheap perfume and guilt. I looked in the mirror and faced my reflection. There were tears held back in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I walked over to the closet and stopped the recording. The camera blinked once, and then saved the file. I reviewed the video. There they were, him and Brenda, together, laughing, touching, lying. I had everything I needed. I sat on the bed holding the phone. For a moment, I thought about deleting it, about dropping everything and pretending nothing had happened. But no, that stage was over. I sent it directly to my email, along with the previous evidence. As I did it, something inside me broke, but not from pain, from liberation. It was as if by pressing send, I was also sending away years of humiliation. Then I put away the camera, zipped up the suitcase, and headed to the lobby. I needed air. The ocean was an intense blue, the sky clear. I walked along the pier with slow steps, feeling the wind caress my face. I thought about Brenda. I thought about how easy it had been for her to steal what wasn't hers. But I also thought about me, about how I had allowed others to drive my life. I stopped in front of the horizon and whispered, "No more." That phrase was a pact with myself. I would no longer be the woman who waits for explanations. I would no longer be the faithful wife who swallows her dignity to sustain an empty marriage. From that moment on, I would be the architect of his downfall. I returned to the hotel with a slight smile. He was at the bar, faking a work call. When he saw me, he raised his hand and said, "Honey, how was the spa?" "Wonderful," I replied. "I feel brand new." We sat together and ordered a glass of wine. He talked about business, the weather, trivialities. I just listened to him, wondering how he could lie with such calm. He was a perfect actor, but he didn't know his show was already over. That night, I slept peacefully. I knew the next day would be the beginning of the end. And as I closed my eyes, I felt that the naive, blind, and silent Susan had been left behind. The one who would wake up tomorrow would be another woman, one who no longer feared losing him, because she had understood that she had already lost him a long time ago. The next morning dawned with a strange air, as if the sun also knew that something was about to break. I woke up with a feigned calm. He was still sleeping, lying on his back, with that look of false innocence that fooled me for so many years. I watched him for a long time, trying to remember the last time I loved him without fear, without doubts, without distance. I couldn't remember. Love, when it dies, doesn't do it all at once. It goes out like a candle burning in silence, without drawing attention. And that day, facing that man who was once my everything, I knew the flame had been extinguished completely. I got up, opened the curtains, and let the light in. "Good morning," I said with a voice that sounded too normal. "Good morning, love," he replied, stretching as if he had no sins to hide. While he showered, I discreetly checked the camera I had hidden the previous morning. The battery was still charged, the green light blinking with patience. The device waited, just like me, for the moment to record his fall. Breakfast passed without shocks. He talked about the boat ride, the gala dinner that night, the nearby beach. His speech was so banal it was almost offensive. I nodded, smiling politely, like an actress in a play she already knew by heart. But behind that kind facade, my mind didn't rest. Everything had to be perfect. Not a single mistake, not an extra word. The trap had to snap shut just when they felt safest. At 9 o'clock sharp, he said he had to go down to the lobby to confirm a reservation. He kissed me on the cheek and grabbed his phone. I pretended to be distracted by a magazine. I watched him leave without moving. When the door closed, the room filled with a new silence. It wasn't emptiness. It was power. For the first time, the silence was on my side. I waited a few minutes before getting up. I went to the door. I cracked it open just a sliver and looked down the hallway. Nothing. But something in the air told me he had already made the call. I went back, grabbed my purse, and headed to the end of the hallway where a small service door connected to the side stairwell. It was the perfect hiding spot. From there, I could see without being seen, thanks to a mirror in the corner. My heart beat with a mix of adrenaline and clarity. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. At 10:15, I saw her arrive. Brenda, my friend, my confidant, my sister at heart. She was wearing a beige dress, elegant, discreet, as if she wanted to look innocent even in her sin. She walked with a firm step, without looking sideways. My husband appeared a few seconds later. He greeted her with a smile so natural it hurt. "Finally," he said. "You don't know how much I miss this," she replied. "Don't speak so loud," he whispered. "She's convinced I went to the lobby." That sentence made me hold back a bitter laugh. I was convinced, yes, but not of what he thought. They both entered the room. The door closed. The sound of the deadbolt was like the start of a carefully rehearsed scene. From the hallway, I watched the reflection in the mirror opposite the window. I could see enough to understand everything. I saw them hug, laugh, talk with that repugnant complicity that only cowards have when they think no one is watching. My breathing remained controlled. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just watched, cold and awake. It was like watching a movie, only I was the author of the script. I heard his voice. "You don't know what I had to put up with last night." "Poor thing," Brenda whispered mockingly. "Sleeping with her must be a punishment." "It's almost over. I just need a little more time." "And then?" she asked, placing her hand on his chest. "Then everything will be ours." The rage rose in me like a wave, but I held it back. It wasn't time to explode. Every word of his was being registered, every gesture recorded. The camera watched them with the same patience I had waited with for years. Brenda sat on the bed, crossing her legs flirtatiously. "What if she realizes?" she asked quietly. "She won't. She believes what she wants to believe." "You always underestimated her." "And I wasn't wrong," he said. That last sentence was the hardest blow, not because of what he said, but because it confirmed what I feared, that for years my silence had been his fuel. I leaned against the wall. My palms were sweating, but not from nerves. It was contained fury, an ancient fury that was now finding its channel. I stayed there, watching them for more than 10 minutes. Brenda laughed. He kissed her. And the camera, faithful, saved it all. At 10:30, she got up to leave. "See you tonight," she said, fixing her hair in the mirror. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too." She closed the door and left. He stayed alone, checking his phone. I took a step back, noiselessly, and waited for him to come out. 5 minutes later, I saw him leave with the same carefree air as always. I entered the room. The smell of Brenda's perfume was still floating in the air. The open wine on the table, the glass marked with lipstick, the messed up bed. Every detail was a silent confession. I walked to the closet, turned off the camera, and reviewed the footage. There they were. Their laughter, their caresses, their betrayal, filmed with ruthless sharpness. While I watched the recording, I didn't cry, not a single tear. I just felt a strange serenity, as if every second of accumulated pain had transformed into strength. I turned off the screen and put the device at the bottom of my purse. It was time to use the weapon they themselves had handed me. I went down to the lobby. I found him sitting at the bar, pretending to check his cell phone. I approached with a polite smile. "Did you confirm the reservation?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "Everything is all set." I stroked his shoulder. "Perfect," I said. "This night will be unforgettable." He smiled, without knowing how much truth was in my words. That afternoon, I locked myself in the bathroom with my laptop. I downloaded the files and uploaded them to a private cloud. Then I sent the video to 3 addresses, one to his work email, another to a friend of his, the one who always looked at me with pity, and one more to Brenda's husband, Dave. There was no turning back, and I didn't want there to be. When night fell, I dressed in the same blue dress he admired so much. I looked in the mirror and took a deep breath. I wasn't a sad woman. I was a free woman. The Susan who had felt fear that morning didn't exist anymore. The one who would go down to the dining room now would be someone new, someone who knew you don't need a gun to destroy someone who betrays you. Just the truth at the exact moment. And that night, that truth was already traveling via email, heading to its destinations. Every word, every image, every forbidden kiss. Everything. Tomorrow, the whole world would know who they really were. And when the storm fell upon them, I would already be far away, silent, unstoppable. The next sunrise brought no peace. The sea remained calm. But inside me, a storm blew that I could barely contain. I knew this day would mark a before and an after. At 6 a.m, I was already awake, sitting by the window, watching the waves hit the rocks. My husband slept deeply. He had no idea that in a matter of hours, his entire life would collapse. The silence was so dense I could hear the ticking of my watch. Every second reminded me that the moment was approaching. I didn't feel fear, but an icy calm. A calm only felt by someone who has decided never to turn back. At 7:30, I went down to eat breakfast alone. He was still sleeping, or pretending to. I didn't care. I poured myself coffee and opened my notebook. There I wrote a single sentence. The one who betrays forgets that the truth has a good memory. While I savored the first sip, I watched the tables around me. Couples talking about love, tourists laughing, families taking photos. They all seemed to live a normality that no longer belonged to me. I, on the other hand, awaited the collapse with the serenity of someone who has already said goodbye to everything. At 9:30 he appeared. He looked tired, his eyes a bit puffy, but he tried to hide it. "Good morning, love," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Good morning," I replied softly. He took a seat, ordered orange juice, and talked about unimportant plans. The boat ride, the gala dinner, the return home. I listened in silence, studying every gesture. His hands moved nervously, his eyes avoided mine. Guilt has a language that doesn't need words. At 10 o'clock sharp, his cell phone vibrated. He grabbed it quickly, thinking I didn't notice anything. "Who is it?" I asked. "The hotel, to confirm dinner." He answered without looking at me. I nodded. "Perfect." "Don't be long," I said with a calm smile. "No, I won't be long." He got up, took the keys, and left the dining room. I counted mentally. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th step, he was already talking on the phone. I knew what he was saying, even if I didn't need to hear it. I left my cup on the table. I got up slowly and followed him. The hotel was a labyrinth of carpeted hallways, with golden mirrors reflecting twisted versions of reality. I saw him stop in front of the room, look both ways, and open it carefully. He went in. The door closed. I stood still for a few seconds. I could feel the pulse in my temples, as if my entire body were a drum. I took a breath, reached for the camera in my purse, and walked to the end of the corridor, where I could see the door through a side mirror. I didn't need more. The scene was repeating, almost the same as the day before, but this time with something different. I was ready to end it. It was 10:20 when I saw Brenda arrive. She was wearing a white dress and a hat trying to cover her face, but she couldn't hide her walk. The same walk I saw her use so many times in my house, crossing my living room with familiarity. This time, that step was taking her straight to her ruin. My husband received her with a broad smile. He took her hand. He kissed her with the security of someone who thinks they have the world under control. I didn't look away. Every gesture, every word was a confirmation. I saw them talk by the window. She laughed. He leaned toward her. They looked like two teenagers in love, oblivious to the weight of their lies. The love they felt wasn't passion. It was arrogance, that absurd belief that consequences only exist for others. For a few minutes, I watched them in silence. Then, without losing my composure, I took my phone and opened my email. I verified that the video had been sent. Everything was in motion. The copies were already arriving at their recipients: his boss, his family, and Brenda's husband. All that was left was to wait. And that was when I decided to do something else. I approached slowly, walking soundlessly, until I was in front of the door. I didn't go in, I just knocked twice. Silence. Then, his voice. "Susan? Is that you?" I didn't answer. I just waited. I heard them moving inside, clumsy, nervous. When the door opened, I found their two faces frozen in the air. Brenda had her blouse unbuttoned. He had the look of someone who has just seen a ghost. "What are you doing here?" he asked with a threat of a voice. "I wanted to see if the room was as comfortable as you said in your messages," I replied with a serene voice. Brenda went pale. "Susan, I can explain." "I don't doubt it," I interrupted her, "but I don't need to hear you. You already did everything in front of the camera." My husband's look filled with terror. "What camera?" he asked. "The one you didn't know how to see, just like you didn't see me," I answered. Before he could react, my phone vibrated with several notifications. His boss, Brenda's husband. The copies had arrived. I looked him in the eyes and said, "There is no turning back." "Susan, please," he shouted, stepping closer. "We can talk." I took a step back. "No, there is nothing left to talk about. I love you." I laughed bitterly. "No, Richard, you love yourself, and you don't even do that well." Brenda started to cry. "Susan, don't do it. My husband, my family." "Then you should have thought about that before betraying the person who opened the door of her home to you." For an instant, silence filled the room. Only the hum of the air conditioner could be heard. I looked at them and felt strangely at peace. There were no screams or tears, only justice, cold, clean, inevitable. "Don't worry," I said finally. "I don't plan to stay and watch the disaster. I only came to say goodbye." I gathered my things, walked to the door, and added, "Oh, and don't try to delete anything. It's already in the cloud." I closed the door behind me without looking back. The hallway felt long, but my steps were firm. With every meter, I felt the weight falling off my shoulders. When I reached the elevator, I hit the button for the lobby and looked at my reflection in the interior mirror. I didn't see rage or sadness, only determination. I didn't just want to break them. I wanted to be whole again. When the elevator doors opened, the chaos had already begun. In the lobby, a man was shouting into a phone. It was Dave, Brenda's husband. He was holding his cell phone, with the video playing on the screen. The eyes of the guests were pinned on him. A few seconds later, I saw my husband running down the stairs, followed by Brenda. His face was unhinged, his eyes looking for an exit that didn't exist anymore. Dave lunged toward him. He screamed at him. "With my wife, you bastard!" In the hotel, right in my face. The scene was chaotic, heartbreaking, and yet I felt an absolute serenity. It was the ending they had written, and I just let it play out. I walked away slowly, while security guards rushed to separate them. The sound of shouting faded behind me. Outside, the ocean was the same. The wind smelled like freedom. That morning, the resort became their ruin, and I, finally, became my own salvation. That same afternoon, while the chaos continued to spread through the hotel, I locked myself in my room. Outside, hurried footsteps, murmurs, and ringing phones could be heard. The rumor had grown like fire between the curtains. The recording was already running through the cell phones of half the world, and I just watched in silence. I didn't feel guilt. I felt justice. I turned on the TV. On the local news, my husband's name was already being mentioned next to the word scandal. One of the hotel security cameras had captured the altercation in the lobby. The images played over and over. Him trying to flee, Dave screaming, people recording with their phones. Everything he had wanted to hide for years was now exposed without filters, before everyone. And I just breathed. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in front of the window. The ocean was calm, as if the world wasn't ending down below. For a moment, I wondered if I had gone too far, but then I remembered his mocking laugh, the nights of contempt, the empty promises. No, I hadn't gone too far. I had only arrived where I needed to be. As the sun set, I opened my laptop and checked my email. Dozens of new notifications, forwarded messages, screenshots, headlines. Every click was a confirmation that everything had worked. Among the emails was one from Brenda. It just said, "Please delete it. My family has seen it. My son is crying. Don't do this to us." I read it 3 times. I didn't reply. In another time, I would have felt pity. I would have wanted to forgive, but not anymore. You can't ask for compassion from someone you never showed any to. The next email was from my husband. "Susan, let's talk. All this can be fixed. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. Please don't destroy everything we built." I smiled. He talked about a mistake as if it were a slip-up. But his betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a decision repeated for years. And decisions, sooner or later, send a bill. I turned off the computer and grabbed my cell phone. There were dozens of missed calls. None of them were worth it. Silence, once again, was my best answer. I lay on the bed and closed my eyes. For years, his voice had been my constant noise. Now, for the first time, silence sounded like freedom. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, it was already night. The cell phone kept vibrating. This time I answered. It was him. "Susan." His voice sounded broken, desperate. "Yes. Please, we have to talk. We have nothing to say to each other. You are destroying me." "No, Richard. You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the lights." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Why did you do this?" he asked finally. "Because I needed to see what you were worth without your lies." And now what are you going to do? Celebrate? No, live. I hung up without waiting for a reply. The next morning, I went down to the hotel dining room. Gazes followed me, some with pity, others with curiosity. I didn't care. I ordered a coffee and watched the staff speak in low voices. A woman approached me and whispered, "You are incredible. Not everyone would have your courage." I barely smiled. Courage wasn't what I had plenty of. It was dignity, and no one was taking that from me again. While I ate breakfast, I saw Richard pass by. He was wearing dark glasses and his face was puffy, as if he hadn't slept. He stopped for an instant, trying to catch my eye. I kept stirring my coffee. He didn't exist to me anymore. That afternoon, I received a message from Dave. It just said, "Thanks for opening my eyes. I'm sorry your pain was necessary to see the truth." I stared at those words. They weren't comfort, but they were poetic justice. In a single sentence, everything that happened was summarized. My pain was the flashlight that lit up everyone's lies. I put away the phone. I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I was breathing without anxiety. I owed no explanations. I owed no apologies. I only owed myself. At night, before packing my things, I turned on the camera one last time. I recorded myself looking straight at the lens, not for him, nor for Brenda. For me. I said, "I am not the woman they betrayed. I am the woman who survived. And that, by itself, is vengeance enough." I turned off the device and packed everything. I left the hotel without looking back. Outside, the wind was fresh, the sky clean. I got into the taxi, and as we drove away, I looked out the window one last time. The building grew small in the distance until it disappeared. I felt a mix of relief and sadness, but more than anything, I felt peace. When I got home, I found the door ajar. It was him, sitting on the sofa, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. The man who was once my refuge was now just a specter. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Waiting for you." "You shouldn't." "Susan, I lost everything," he said with a trembling voice. "The job, the friends. Brenda had a breakdown. She's in the hospital. And you expect me to feel pity? No, I just wanted you to know that I love you." "No, what you love is the comfort I gave you." "Please," he murmured, "we can start over." I approached slowly. I looked him in the eyes. There was fear there, and something else. Emptiness. "Richard," I told him, "there is no turning back. You lied to yourself so much you don't even know who you are anymore. And I finally discovered who I am without you." I turned around. I walked toward the door and added without looking back, "This time, the goodbye doesn't hurt. It hurts to have taken so long to say it." I walked out. The sound of the door closing was perhaps the most liberating sound of my life. That night, I sat on the terrace of my house with a cup of tea. The silence returned, but this time it was a good silence. Not the silence of submission, but of freedom. I looked at the stars and remembered something my mother used to tell me. Strong women don't scream, they act. I smiled, because in the end, that was exactly what I did. The news exploded like a bomb, not just in the house or the neighborhood, but across the state. My husband, the honorable businessman, the man with the impeccable smile and family speeches, now appeared in the headlines. Executive betrayed by his own ambition. Leaked video exposes affair with colleague's wife. I watched the news without moving a muscle. Every word was a confirmation. For years, I had lived under his shadow, listening to people call him an example of integrity, while I was just the silent wife who always tagged along. Now his silence was mine, and his ruin, too. Reporters camped in front of his office. The cameras followed every move. Social media did the rest. Employees stepped away when he arrived, and his partners, who used to call him a friend, stopped answering. A week later, the board removed him from his position. I remember the call. "Susan," he said with a broken voice, "they fired me." "I'm sorry," I replied without emotion. "Do you really mean it?" "No," I said frankly. "I expected it." There was a long silence on the other end. Then I just heard weeping. Not the weeping of a repentant man, but of one who understands, too late, that all his power was an illusion. Brenda, for her part, disappeared from the city. Dave left her. Her daughter moved in with her grandparents. She tried to call me several times. I never answered. One night, she left a voicemail. "Susan, you don't know how much I regret it. I don't know what happened to me. I swear I never wanted to hurt you." I turned off the phone. Regret doesn't clean stained hands. It only dyes them with tears. Despite everything, I didn't feel pleasure. I didn't enjoy the scandal or the fall. It was something colder, deeper, a sense of balance, as if finally the universe had adjusted the scales. But with that calm came something new, the emptiness. Because vengeance, although just, doesn't always leave satisfaction. It leaves silence. And silence, when there is no longer hate to feed it, becomes reflection. I began to ask myself at what moment my life had been reduced to waiting for justice. I had dedicated years to surviving his contempt, his control disguised as affection, his selfishness of a man who thought he was God. And now that it was all over, who was I? A free woman, yes, but also a solitary woman. One day, leaving the house, a neighbor approached me. "Susan, can I tell you something?" she asked with a conspiratorial tone. "Sure." "You did what many of us wish we had the courage to do." "It wasn't courage," I replied. "It was exhaustion." She smiled sadly, and I knew that, although my story scandalized many, deep down it represented all the women who once had to swallow betrayal in silence. The phone rang again one night. It was him again. "Susan," he whispered, "I have no one. They took everything from me. That happens when you don't take care of what you have. I need you." "No, you need redemption, and I am not the one who can give you that." "Are you going to leave me like this, destroyed?" "I'm not leaving you destroyed, Richard. I'm leaving you responsible." And I hung up. He didn't call again. Days passed. The scandal began to fade, but the consequences kept burning. His career collapsed. His friendships dissolved. His name became synonymous with shame. And I kept walking, without looking back. People looked at me differently, with respect, and that was new. After decades of being invisible, I had recovered my reflection. One afternoon, I received a letter with no return address. Inside, just a sheet with a handwritten sentence. "Thank you for showing me that even monsters can fall." I never knew who sent it. Maybe some woman who lived through something similar, or maybe someone who simply understood. I kept that note between the pages of my journal. Sometimes they ask me if I regret it, and I answer no. Because what I did wasn't vengeance. It was liberation. For years, I had been a prisoner of a lie, of an image, of a routine where my voice didn't matter. When I discovered the truth, I didn't just expose him. I returned myself to me. That night, I went out to walk along the water. The air was fresh, the sky clear. I closed my eyes and let the wind mess up my soul. I thought about everything I had lost. A marriage, a friend, a whole life of appearances. but also about what I had gained: my name, my voice, my peace. Because when a woman frees herself from fear, no one can ever dominate her again. I looked at the horizon and promised myself I wouldn't love from need again, but from choice. And if anyone ever asked me what it feels like to betray, I would answer, I don't know, but I know what it feels like to forgive myself for allowing it for so long. They say that after the fire always comes the silence, but no one warns you how deep it can be. Several months passed since that storm, and the world seemed to have forgotten the scandal. The headlines changed, people found new dramas to comment on, but I was still learning to live among the ashes, not of pain, but of habit, of that life that once revolved around a man I confused with love. I remember the first sunrise after everything. The sun came through my house window, painting the walls in golden tones. That day I had no rush. I didn't have to make breakfast or iron shirts or fake smiles. I just poured myself coffee and drank it slowly, as if savoring my freedom for the first time. I looked around. The house was empty, yes, but also clean of lies. The air smelled different. It was mine. That morning, I understood that solitude isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's the first act of self-love. Little by little, I began to rebuild my routine. I went back to reading, painting, taking care of my plants. I recovered the time I had gifted to someone who never deserved it. Every flower that bloomed in my garden was a reminder that life goes on, even after being torn up by the roots. And then something happened that I didn't expect. I started to forgive myself. Not for exposing him, not for the revenge, but for having stayed silent so long, for having convinced myself that patience was a virtue, when in reality it was fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of accepting that I had loved a man who didn't know how to love. Forgiving myself was harder than forgiving him. But I did it. And with every tear I let fall, something inside me broke free. One day, walking through the park, I crossed paths with an elderly couple. He was holding her hand tenderly, as if time hadn't passed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel envy. I smiled, because I understood that true love isn't sought. It's built when two souls know how to take care of each other. And if you don't find it outside, you can build it inside yourself. I became my own company, my own refuge. Time later, I heard through third parties that Richard had left the city. He lives alone, in a small apartment, without family or a job. They say he aged overnight, that he barely goes out. It doesn't make me happy or sad. It just reminds me that everyone reaps what they sow. And he, for years, sowed lies. Sometimes I think about calling him, not to reopen wounds, but to close the cycle. But then I understand that there are silences that speak more than any goodbye. My silence was my answer, and in that silence, I found peace. One night, while organizing my things, I found the camera I recorded everything with. I took it in my hands. It was no longer a symbol of revenge, but of rebirth. It had been my weapon, my shield, and my voice. For a moment, I thought about deleting it all, but I decided to keep it. Not as proof of what they did, but as a reminder of what I was capable of doing for myself. A few months later, I opened a small workshop in my house. Stories that heal. There, women of all ages came to tell their pain, their rage, their betrayals. I taught them what took me a lifetime to learn. Don't wait for someone to save you. No one will rescue you. But you can do it. The voice you most need to hear is yours. Every time one of them smiled through tears, I felt the circle closing a little more. My story, born of pain, transformed into a bridge for others. One afternoon, while we were finishing a session, a young woman asked me, Ms. Susan, did you ever fall in love again? I kept silent for a few seconds. I looked out the window, where the sun was starting to set, and replied, "Yes, with myself." She smiled, and I knew she understood. Sometimes life strips everything away from you, and you think it's the end. But what it really does is give you the chance to start over without masks. It doesn't matter how much it hurts to lose what you thought was love. The true love, the one that doesn't betray, doesn't lie, and doesn't humiliate, starts when you decide not to lie to yourself anymore. That was my lesson, my punishment, and my rebirth. I'm 63 years old today. I walk slowly, but without fear. I no longer worry if someone loves me. I love myself enough. I no longer seek justice because life itself takes care of balancing the books. When people ask me how I survived so much betrayal, I simply answer, I learned to let the fire burn me so I could turn into ash, and from there, become light again. And if you have reached this far, let me tell you something. It is never too late to start over. It is never too late to leave behind whoever dims your light. It is never too late to look in the mirror and recognize the woman you were, who resisted, and who is still here standing tall. Because no matter how much they hurt you, if your soul is still alive, you still have everything to live for. But before I say goodbye, I want to extend a very special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment down below which city you are watching from, because I want to get to know you and know where you are joining me from. I'm Susan Aguirre, and this was my story.